Thanks for your patience as we get the tech set up. You're going to hear from the Mayor in a moment. Adam is here to answer any supplemental questions you may have after you've asked questions of the Mayor. And we also have with us, should we need it, Mary Person, our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager of Financial and Corporate Services. So over to you, Your Worship.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. And first, let me acknowledge the heart-wrenching news that Adam had to deliver earlier today about temporary layoffs. I know it was a very difficult decision for the administration. It saddens me truly that hardworking and dedicated folks are having to be temporarily laid off. It is our hope that when facilities and attractions reopen, we can get these city family members back to work as quickly as possible. And I know that the city has been working very collaboratively with our union partners, and there's no doubt that this was a difficult decision for everyone, and it was not undertaken lightly. The city is handling this layoff as compassionately as is possible to ensure that city staff are supported and given access to top-ups, mental health supports, benefits, in addition to provincial and federal support that they'll be able to access. Now, secondly, I'd also like to acknowledge all the parents and school staff out there who are starting some online learning today with their children. I know that this is a challenging time right now and stress levels are very high all around, and many parents are trying to balance work from home and childcare and keeping their kids on track with school, including myself as the junior social studies substitute teacher and science teacher, and one day phys ed when they let me out again. But I just wanted you to know that my thoughts are with all of you, parents and kids. Hang in there. We'll get through this together, and we'll probably learn a few interesting and different things as well. So now on to the budget, which was the substance of today's discussion at City Council. We knew that our budget situation would be serious, and today's update really brought that home. While we continue to advocate to provincial and federal governments about the need for liquidity to help support our cash flows, we still do not have any certainty that we will be provided with the backstop that we need. So the city will need to take measures that will enable us to keep things running and deliver essential services to Edmontonians while doing our best to balance our books, as we must every year. Now, to give our public an idea of what it takes to keep operating services going, we spend about $8.2 million a day, or close to $250 million a month. And that doesn't include what we spend on infrastructure projects, which is close to the same and can be up to $500 million in a month during the peak of construction season. So the projected budget numbers and reductions in revenues that were presented today were startling for all members of City Council. As you can imagine, COVID-19 has presented a significant challenge and impacts to our revenues, which are down, and our expenses, which are up. At this time, public safety remains our #1 priority, but we also have some financial challenges ahead of us that do need to be addressed. Closure of facilities, suspension of transit and parking fees, deferrals and utility payments, all of these lead to some pressures to ensure that we can keep everything going. So Council had the chance to discuss the bottom line of where our finances are at, as well as some other options to consider, including drawing from our reserves, deferring some capital infrastructure funding, and moving it over to support the operating budget, potential tax implications, though very clearly no decisions were made around tax rates today. That will come in a couple of weeks' time. But ultimately, we had a lot of conversation, as I've had with mayors and councillors from across the region and across the country, that we will need to access some backstop from provincial and or federal governments in order to help get us through this challenging time. For now, what we decided is to extend the delay of municipal tax payments until up to September 30th to allow some further relief, as well as to allow the business improvement areas to delay some of their payments to us right now as well. So a little bit of additional relief to taxpayers, at least in delaying what they are going to have to pay to later in the year than they would normally be accustomed to. And that will also, again, that will include business improvement area levies now. Now, we also discussed the use of the city's financial stabilization reserve, our rainy day fund, if you will, and we will look to redirect some capital funding to operating and redirecting some funds to more emergent areas. And we also agreed to some principles around our budget moving forward. Again, first, safety, the public safety is a top priority. We're going to use, second, a combination of tools. Revenue reductions will be addressed with a combination of one-time funding as well as strategic decisions on spending and service reductions. Third, a long-range focus. We're going to address the short-term issues, but be very mindful of the impact on the municipal corporation's long-term financial sustainability, both in our balance sheet and in the shape of our infrastructure and our economy. Fourth, in terms of the local economy, we want to continue to support stabilization of the local economy in the meantime and look to diversification again over time. Fifth, we want to honor relationships with workforce strategies that will be fair and respectful. Six, we want to continue city building and evaluate for 2020 and beyond what to determine what projects will advance and what might have to stay, but we're still building a city here. And finally, we want to demonstrate empathy and limit tax increases for Edmontonians to the greatest extent that we can, because we know that people are under phenomenal pressure. So in mid-April, we'll look at our budget situation again and be able to give more concrete numbers on the effects that COVID-19 has had on our city and continues to have on our 2020 budget. And mid-April is the time where we would normally look at our spring budget adjustments. But this year, much more difficult decisions may come at that time, such as further service reductions, delays or cancellation of some contracts, or decisions that may affect staffing further. So please know that we are committed to trying to minimize tax implications for our community. And we do know, again, what a hard time everyone is having, particularly businesses that we've heard from, but also households that are in really tough times now amidst this uncertainty. But we are, all of us, in this together, and I think from today's discussion, your city council understands that and stands with you in this difficult time. So finally, just want to address more broadly that over the weekend we saw a number of new cases in Alberta reaching a daily high on Saturday with 79 new cases. And we also just heard from Dr. Hinshaw that tragically 5 Albertans have died today. And I know you keep hearing it, but I'll stress it again. Please keep doing your part to protect yourself, your family, your friends, fellow Edmontonians, frontline workers, especially in our healthcare system. Practice physical distancing and stay home if you can. Our actions significantly impact other Edmontonians. This crisis has really demonstrated how interconnected we are as a community and as a species, and the way we behave impacts each other. And this is why now more than ever, we need to be mindful and take the necessary steps to protect our communities, because again, we are all in this together. So it's a big week across the country in terms of monitoring the flattening of the curve, and we want to do everything possible in Alberta to help contribute to a decrease in cases. Well, thank you all for staying a bit later today and tuning in, and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're happy to take questions, and I also want to thank and acknowledge our interpreters.
Sure, Mayor, thank you for your time. Just, any concerns about filling that backstop from the senior levels of government? So Edmonton's not alone in the shortfall. Are you worried that it'll just simply overwhelm the senior levels and we'll be left with nothing?
Did everyone hear the question? Or I have to get in the habit of repeating them.
You could summarize, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. The question is about will the federal government deliver, or is there a risk of senior orders of government being overwhelmed by other priorities and not coming to the aid of municipalities, if I've got that right. And until we hear black and white that there's going to be relief for municipalities, the same kind of relief that the charitable sector and medium and large size businesses got today, small business got last week, households got the week before, till we hear black letter that there's going to be support for municipal institutions through this. This is going to continue to be a source of real stress and concern for mayors and city administrators and councillors and leaders across the country. in the conversation we had a couple of days ago with the Deputy Prime Minister, mayors from across the country, from Canada's big cities, were all comparing our burn rate, as it were, which is to say, how quickly are we going through cash, and more or less, when will we run out of money? And without support, most of Canada's large cities will not have money in the bank to pay for responders, to provide other essential services, to do what we do to support public health, public safety, and quality of life sometime later this year. None of us can make it into the following year if there's a significant impairment to our cash flow, either with the timing of money coming in or ultimately with bills not getting paid in a significant way. So that's a huge risk to business continuity for the essential services provided by towns, counties, and cities of all sizes, right up to Canada's largest cities. So I know the mayors have a deeply shared concern on this. I do feel like the Deputy Prime Minister heard our plea loud and clear and repeated it back to us. And I've spoken to a number of other federal ministers who hear our plea. And I think that they are considering it. There is a challenge that typically these measures should come from our provinces because municipalities are creatures of the province, but there may not be a province in Alberta, or pardon me, there may not be a province in Canada that can provide the kind of relief that municipalities are ultimately going to need. So there's a bit of a jurisdictional challenge to overcome there, but I think municipalities now, people understand, are too important to not adequately resource through a crisis like this. So I'm confident we will get it resolved, but sooner would be better, such that we could allow our officials to really focus now on relief efforts and getting aid to people who need it. We're happy to be a conduit for any relief measures that provincial and federal governments want to pass along to households or businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Natasha, Dustin, and Keith online. If I could ask whoever isn't speaking next to mute, please. Keith, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks very much. Question for the mayor, for Adam. This may be a debate that happens on April 15th, but I'm wondering about the potential to cancel the 2.08% property tax increase already approved, and what the implications would be for the city if that's done.
So the question was, will council consider adjusting or canceling the 2.08% property tax increase that was previously approved? In our discussions today, we neither made decisions on that firmly one way or the other, but administration's presentation started not just from the 2.08, but there are 3 years of approved budgets ahead of us, all of which will need to be adjusted in the fullness of time. I think we're starting from the premise that we wouldn't want that to go up. We're also fortunate that the provincial government's moves and just how things are shifting against education property tax, that if you look at some of the material that was presented earlier, they net out to fairly close to zero. So I think I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get to a net property tax bill of around zero for most businesses and homeowners, depending on where their individual property assessment fluctuates. So I think moderation is going to be the order of the day for property taxes, and down rather than up. But we have a number of commitments in the hopper, and it's too soon to say where exactly we'll wind up.
Thank you, Keith. Question from Natasha or Dustin. Please mute, Keith. Is there a question?
I have questions, but they're for Mary or Adam. Are we waiting on those?
No, they're both here, so go ahead, Dustin.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Looking at the presentation today, it was presented that there is actually a reduction in expenses, those that are supported by taxes. But what about COVID-19 related costs? Is there an estimate for that as of now? Is that expected to increase the expenses?
So question about our cost increases relative to managing the pandemic. Adam?
So we're continuing to track those costs, Dustin. I would say at this point in time, we don't have anything definitive that we can share in terms of costs. I will say that related to the COVID situation, I think there's some areas of our business that are experiencing pressure associated with it. One's arm's length, it's our police service. One would be our peace officers. So there are certain areas that are experiencing a bit of a pressure associated with us. Our legal services group is experiencing a pressure, but we don't have definitive costs at this time. We are tracking those costs associated with this pandemic, but don't have a specific cost at this time.
I have a follow-up.
Go ahead, Dustin.
Specific to looking at the long-term scenario, which projected a net loss of about $112 million, but noting that the city is hoping not to increase property taxes more than 2.08% already approved. I know decisions haven't been made yet, but specifically, can you give examples of what the city's looking at to make up that lost revenue?
So the question is, one of the projections that we had, if this were to continue for an extended period of time, was an over $100 million impact in terms of negative result to the city of Edmonton. We're looking at multiple options to support that. Those options will be presented to Council on April 15th as part of the supplementary operating budget adjustment. But the categories are expense reduction, using our financial stabilization reserve to a point where we're comfortable, understanding that we're an order of government that can't actually run a deficit, so we need to be conscious of not going too far on the financial stabilization reserve. One of the other options is considering potentially pausing some capital projects and redirecting that funding from capital to operating. And the fourth one is looking at the potential of using some financial contingencies that we have within our operating budget to support as well. From the tax perspective, we're currently, but pre-COVID, we were at 2.08%. The mayor mentioned that a reduction of the provincial government's education tax does change what that could be, and certainly all of these options that we're evaluating will also have an impact on the tax levy, and that's what we'll bring forward on April 15th.
I just want to supplement with 2 quick points. The first is that I don't know where we'll wind up, but we'll be managing down from 2.08 rather than going up would be my expectation at this point. So I don't want to set exact outcomes at this point, but clearly our discussion was about managing down from that, if possible. And then the second thing I wanted to clarify is that on this issue of deficits and their availability to us, technically we can run a 1-year deficit with a plan to make it back over the following years, which is essentially a draw from reserves with a replenishment plan. But what I want to underscore is that we cannot run a structural deficit. We cannot create a permanent and ongoing deficiency in the city's ability to pay its bills. And so even a temporary measure in 1 year still must be paid back in future years, which just shifts the burden and creates costs down the road, which our council's been very good historically about not doing. And that's why certainly a structural deficit is not available to us at this time, unlike other orders of government. And that's part of what's forced our hand here on some of our expenditure controls and the layoffs here today. So it'd be irresponsible for us to move into deficit financing on any sort of ongoing basis, even though technically there is an opportunity to dip 1 year, but that's just financially unsustainable from our point of view. So just to be really clear on that.
Mindful of the time, I'm going to go into the last question. Natasha, do you have one?
Hi, Catherine. Yes, of course I do. Actually, I'd like to revisit the weekend and social distancing and how the mayor thinks that Edmontonians did in this regard.
I think we saw really good progress on social distancing, both in private businesses and in public spaces. From what Adam has told me, and he can supplement, we saw, did lots and lots of inspections over the weekend and overall observed better compliance. The signage and other things, measures on stairs, for example, seem to be having an effect. So my sense, though I'm not allowed to leave my home and look for myself, still for another couple of days here, is that Edmontonians are getting the message, which will prevent the spread or at least slow it and save lives. So that's a good thing. But I'd let Adam supplement from what he's heard from field reports.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I echo the Mayor's comments that what I shared with him is correct, that we are seeing better behaviors from Edmontonians. We monitored open or dogs off leash areas, and we saw pretty good compliance, I would say, on the weekend. Now, the weather was not a great weather weekend for that. We're still monitoring that, but I would say there's been some positive results in terms of monitoring the social or physical distancing. We did also have some positive results in terms of the announcement that was made on Friday by the province related to the specific orders of non-essential business closures. Our folks did tremendous work over the weekend to inspect close to 4,000 businesses, I believe, and the compliance rate was above 90%. So some really good, again, Edmontonians are heeding the call, and they're taking efforts to observe, and we appreciate them for that.
And just a comment to close from you, Adam.
Yes, I do want to reiterate, and it came up in council today a few times, that we are providing relief, either from a deferral perspective or a delay perspective, on utilities and taxes, but it doesn't mean payment elimination. And this was reiterated a few times at council, but I feel like I need to reiterate it again, that this is deferral or delay. It doesn't mean elimination. So if you can pay and you're able to, we encourage you to do that. And it's for two reasons. You won't be facing a backlog of bills when the COVID situation improves, and you'll be providing resources that will help the situation the Mayor described today in terms of some of the core costs or budget we need to continue to run the city during this pandemic. So again, if it's within your means, we strongly encourage you to pay your taxes and to pay your utility bills, because it is necessary funding that allows us to carry out our core services, and you won't be creating a backlog for yourself when we do get to the end of this pandemic, and we will get to the end of this pandemic. And so if you can, we encourage you to pay. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you being so patient today. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.